can definitely get it done in a different way as well.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to talk about, sort of the second trend that we'll get into here, is this almost blending of the lines of offensive and defensive strategy. Because one of the things I sent you over in the DMs was this idea that Ime Udoka has publicly shared of our first form of transition defense is our offensive rebounding threat. So Tari Eason and Amen Thompson are two of the more athletic players to grace the NBA in sort of the 2020s, and you think they'd be fantastic at getting back in transition, being able to sort of wall up, can handle any cross match as well. If you're looking at a guy like Tari, I'm pretty sure I'm happy to trust him on the perimeter, guarding a quick footed point guard, or I'm happy to trust him on someone that's going to try and bully him down in the paint. But instead, Ime, even though he is this defense first coach, has said, no, our first layer of transition defense is our offensive rebounding threat. And it's essentially this idea of, if you're not willing to respect that we're going to attack the glass, we are going to feast and feast and feast there. And that's going to slow you in getting out in transition. And it's just another form of sort of cat and mouse game. What have you thought of this blending of the lines, XJ? Because I know you said you wanted to talk about like this blending of offensive and defensive strategy. That's just one thing that I've noticed. Any comment on that, or any comment on sort of that blending and where we kind of think the game's going? Because I've had guests on the pod before that say, I think we're getting to a point where we're probably going to have to stop talking about the offensive and defensive side of the court, because they're just informing each other more and more these days.
Yeah, I love that, and I think I've heard a lot about Joe Mazzulla in particular talking about being influenced by soccer a lot, or
Uh-huh.
football for you guys, and just the fact of how there's just a flow between offense and defense, and there's not this like hard transition. It's not baseball where we start out in the field and then there's three outs and then we go take our gloves off and pick up our bats. It's like
Yeah.
everything's in a flow. It just goes back and forth. And how do you kind of take advantage of that fact, or how do you leverage that fact and understand what's going on in those transitions to maximize your advantages on either end as a result of those transitions? I think the offensive rebounding thing is really smart and makes a lot of sense. I think it's sort of a continued evolution from a bit of what the Knicks were doing with Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein, who kind of sort of popularized, in my opinion, this sort of offensive rebounding as a style of transition defense.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that the Knicks in particular were able to do this was because Mitchell Robinson is uniquely he is an offensive rebounding machine in of himself. Like it is not like we need to crash the boards with our defensive, with our center and like our guards. It's like, no, Mitchell Robinson will will get the rebounds on his own. So that allows a team like the Knicks last year to kind of get back defensively and also have this threat of the offensive
Yeah.
rebound. So that's a really strong advantage to have, and that pushed the Knicks to a really high, a level higher than I think that their talent really conveyed that they should have been at. But I do think there's other kind of tactics. We're talking about, the transition from offense to defense, but I think there's other things as far as the transition from defense to offense. Something that I know Rick Carlisle was trying out and hasn't done as much, but is sort of like just exclusively playing one-on-one defense and just saying, if you're going to beat us one-on-one, that's fine. But guess what? When we get back in transition, we're going to have an advantage because all of these kinds of mismatches that were helpful for you going this way, now those are disadvantages going the other
Yeah.
way. And so I think that that's something that's cool. I think that's something that Boston has started to do a little bit as well in terms of, having kind of like sort of mismatches on the defensive end and kind of living with it in a one-on-one scenario, because then when they go back the other end, those are serious mismatches for them in their positive way. And I know that Missoula really wants to attack early when they have advantages, 3-on-2, 4-on-3. But if they
Mm.
don't, then he wants to slow it down. And so they kind of look at that. How does that last defensive possession end? Did it end in a defensive rebound? Did it end where we have a matchup advantage that would work as we transition into offense? Did it end in a score and we're taking it out of bounds? Did it end in a steal? And then based on how that defensive possession ended, that determines how they attack the next offensive possession. And I think there's going to be more thinking that is put into those situations, so that to the point where players are really thinking about it in that way. Okay, this ended in a defensive rebound. who's this guy that I was guarding? Now he's guarding me. That's an advantage for me. And so we are going to look to exploit that as we go down the other way before they're able to set up their defense. So I think that's something we'll start to continue to see as a larger and larger trend.
I think it's something that really eases the cognitive load on a night to night basis as well. Because if I am the point guard for the Boston Celtics, say, take it back 10 years to Rajon Rondo running sort of set after set, I've got this playbook in my head and I might be this wizard, this chess master on the basketball court, but my teammates might not be. And I might have to call something out where it's right. We're running side out, pick and roll, whatever. I'm not too advanced in the verbiage still. But what I can spot as I'm running down the floor is, oh, look at who's guarding Jason Tatum. Look at who's guarding Jaylen Brown. It's a really key tenet and like a really core principle that we can say, like, if you grab a defensive rebound, you look up, you look for that size mismatch, and we're going. And it just means on a night to night basis. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter if Sam Hauser and Jordan Walsh are in. It doesn't matter if Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are in. We have this one clear philosophy that we can just sort of branch out from. And that makes it much easier to play point five basketball from the get-go. It's not just all these cute little intricate passes. It's quick decision making, regardless of if that's isolation, regardless if that's mismatch hunting, or the beautiful game Spurs stuff where we're trying to commit like death by 1,000 cuts. I just wanted to say on the offensive rebounding point, I'm really happy, XJ, that you brought up the football crossover. Joe Mazzulla has brought up that it's something that influences him. Our media and press went mad over here because he was seen talking to Pep Guardiola, the coach or manager of of Manchester City, like the best coach of the last 20, 25 years. And my team, Arsenal, I'm a massive football fan, by the way, massive football fan before basketball fan. And we've sort of transitioned over the last few years. It's been a strange journey in the Quantrill household and one that my dad has sort of struggled with. It's almost like I've had to come out to him as a basketball fan. I've been being a really avid football fan. But like, I'm an Arsenal fan and we're meant to be challenging for the championship, trying to win the league this year. And it's almost like if we were a basketball team, we would be really, really heavily reliant on sideline and baseline out of bounds plays. It's like that would be the thing that gives us the edge, because Arsenal at the moment, we are corner kings. So it's this static play where the ball goes out of play and you get to load up in this set scenario. And so far, no team has really been able to stop us, aside from when we went to Europe and we came up against another team that are really good at these set pieces. And there was all this debate about how the hell do you stop Arsenal scoring from corners? We sort of had this trick that teams just could not beat. It's almost like the Phoenix Suns introduced the 7 seconds or less pick and roll offense, and it's Steve Nash and Amari, and everyone's looking and going, I've got no clue how to stop this. And the idea has traditionally been you get all of your defenders close to the goal, close to the hoop, as you will, and you say, just try and attack that ball, try and clear it, try and get it away. And this European team came to us and they said, we're actually going to take players out of our box and we're going to put them in an offensive position. And we're going to say we have 3 men ready to attack. So if you don't score this corner, you are leaving yourselves incredibly vulnerable. And it's just this really neat crossover where you look at the threat of offensive rebounding from the Rockets and the Knicks, like you said. And it's clear, regardless of which sport you favor, these principles really cross over, because that idea of, no, we're going to leave men up there as a form of defense. We're going to pose that threat of attack as a form of defense. It's going to prevail across these sports for, decades and decades. And it's just interesting how it pops up all over the place.
I love that so much. Yeah, it's just at the end of the day, it's all just trade-offs. It's all just risk reward, and the best defense is a great offense, and the best offense is a great defense. I mean, like it just is true, and I think that's such a cool example. Like I know very little about football, I'll say, but I do know what a corner is. I thank you for explaining it to me like a child, which I appreciate that very much.
Listeners too, listeners.
Yeah.
Let's be clear, XJ, I'm sure you know your stuff, man. Don't you worry.
No, I know very little about football, but like I didn't even think of it. Like when I'm like, okay, Jack's going to tell this story. He's going to explain how they kind of figured this out. I'm like, what did they do differently? And it's just like, of course, just be more aggressive on the other end. Just make you pay a greater cost for not being successful at the thing you're trying to accomplish. And that's how I think about basketball as well. And I think that's how a lot of coaches are thinking about it.